Hey, seasoners, welcome back to another episode of the Travel and Tourism Podcast, my first season. Today is one of those standalone episodes where I will be going one by one through all of my seasons. And if you've been following, we left off with my season of Playa Blanca, with me and my girlfriend headed to Otranto, Italy, summer of 97. So let's get to it, shall we? My girlfriend picked me up at the Milan airport on May 13th, 1997, and the moment was a little bittersweet. I still wasn't sure if I had made the right decision to decline the offer of Morea for Otranto, and as she later admitted, neither was she. But the second I saw her when I was walking out of the arrivals gate, I knew. I stayed with her in Italy until the season began. That year, however, Club Med was going through financial troubles. In 1997, its shareholders replaced the G.O.s family management with Philippe Bourguignon. The new president was focused on the bottom line. Among his changes was a policy to delay the opening dates of many summer villages, including Otranto, until they were nearly at full capacity in the first weeks. Meanwhile, I was starting to feel restless, spending a couple of weeks at my girlfriend's place, watching endless Italian TV. To break the monotony, I reached out to my old chief of village from Columbusio. I knew Patrizia was in Metaponto that summer, so I asked if I could work there until Otranto opened. She gladly agreed. The very next day, my girlfriend and I packed our bags and took the long train ride from northern to southern Italy. After that grueling journey, I swore I would never travel by train again. We had no choice, however, since we were overloaded with luggage, and that was how most European G.O.s traveled. But juggling 4 or 5 heavy suitcases while switching trains was no easy feat. The Italians were not particularly patient either, and didn't care if my hands were full as I tried to make the connections. Still, we arrived in one piece and jumped straight into work. It was wonderful to reunite with Patrizia and also with my good friend from Columbusio, Ketut from Bali. When we spotted each other in the main restaurant, he froze for a second, then shouted across the room, "My brother!" We embraced in front of the Coke machine for what felt like forever. It was pure joy to see him again. Metaponto was the biggest resort I had ever seen, a massive family village. I was technically supposed to be helping the Landsports team, but most of my time was consumed by something called baby solo. What is baby solo, you ask? Only one of the most diabolical inventions ever created. Let me explain. Around lunch and dinner, though mostly dinner, many parents would leave their babies in the room to sleep while they went off to enjoy one of the resort's many restaurants. A team of security guards patrolled the GM rooms on bikes, and if they heard a baby crying, would note the room number and report it at reception. The reception G.O. would then write the number on a board. Here's where the nightmare began. If an unlucky G.O. happened to stroll by, the reception staff could detain them for the dreaded task. That unfortunate G.O. was handed 2 items, a large bell in one hand and a sign with the room number of the crying baby in the other. The mission? March into each of the 3 or 4 restaurants in search of the parents. And the bell? That was for maximum humiliation. Entering a restaurant, the G.O. had to shout, "Baby solo, baby solo, baby solo," and clang the bell loudly, forcing every parent to turn and stare at the poor messenger. The process repeated until the parents were found. Diabolical. We had only been in Metaponto for about 2 weeks when the long-awaited news finally came. The village of Otranto, near Brindisi, was opening at last. And thank goodness, because I was completely baby soloed out. When we arrived, the planning G.O. showed us to our rooms. My girlfriend, still the chief hostess, received a nicer room, but even so, the accommodations were tiny. Most G.O.s had to share their space with little to no privacy. Not long after, Lulu, the chief of village, appeared and commented on how odd it was to see me there. What she meant was that Otranto had practically the same team as the previous summer. Pipo, the former head of tennis from Playa, was now chief of sports, along with my girlfriend and several others like the nurse from Playa. I was the outsider who hadn't been part of that crew. Still, I quickly caught up with Michele from Playa Blanca, who filled me in on my duties. I was thrilled to be working with Michele again. He was such a character. We were always laughing together, and his energy was nothing short of contagious. Another Gio I really admired was Laurent Jova Miniti, the chief of animation. I highly recommend checking out his episode of my first season, which aired in April of 2021. In that episode, we dive deep into our season in Otranto, so I won't steal any of the stories here. Trust me, it's definitely worth a listen. Before the village officially opened, I learned that 2 guard dogs patrolled the grounds during winter. By day, they were kept out of sight, apparently because of their, let's just say, unpredictable temperaments. Naturally, I couldn't resist seeking them out. I love dogs, and in Club Med, they were a rare sight. I tracked down their enclosure and climbed the wall for a look. From above, I hesitated. The dogs looked half wild, their eyes fixed on me with wary curiosity. Still, I threw caution to the wind and jumped down, bracing myself to be met by either wagging tails or bared teeth. The dogs approached cautiously, but once they sensed I meant no harm, they warmed to me. Still, there was something untamed about them, as if they hadn't entirely shed their wild instincts. I quickly realized that any sudden movement, or even showing favoritism toward one over the other, could tip the balance. And sure enough, it did. One night after the show, I slipped home to use the bathroom. My girlfriend, heading back to her quarters, spotted one of the dogs roaming near the G.O. lodgings. Knowing I was sitting on the toilet, she thought it would be amusing to let the dog into our room. From my seat, I opened the bathroom door and saw him trot in. I called him over, and he came, tail wagging. As I reached down to pet him, nothing wrong yet, but the door to the room was still wide open, and in the next moment, the second dog appeared. That was when things turned from playful to frightening. Suddenly, the dog that had just entered began to growl and snarl like we owed him money or a lifetime supply of Alpo. My girlfriend was trapped between the two of them as they squared off like rival gang leaders. Hackles raised high, teeth flashing. They circled each other, with my girlfriend stuck in the middle, frozen in terror. And me? I was still sitting on the toilet, wiping like my life depended on it, because in that moment, it kind of did. Time stretched into eternity as I tried to finish the world's fastest cleanup while making sure I didn't, well, miss a spot. I finally leapt off the bowl and crept into the room, trying to calm them with my best soothing voice. No luck. These dogs were locked in, ready to throw down, and nothing I said was going to stop them. I edged toward my girlfriend, bracing myself for the worst, when suddenly salvation arrived. The Italian caretaker, who looked after the dogs all winter, stormed in, shouting commands in rapid-fire Italian. Miraculously, they obeyed. Later, I can only assume one dog had been jealous of the attention I'd been giving the other when he barged in. Crisis averted. Now, where were we? Maybe 3 days after we arrived, I remember sitting in the outdoor amphitheater at night when the nurse from Playa finally arrived. She had spent the entire day traveling and was telling us how exhausted she felt. Then, out of nowhere, the choreographer appeared and said she was needed immediately. It was close to midnight, and I'll never forget the look on her face. But true to form, she went and learned the choreography like a trooper. That was Otranto in a nutshell. There was never a moment to waste. We still had a few days before the village officially opened, so the main restaurant remained closed. In the meantime, we ate at the Annex restaurant, which doubled as the disco at night and even had a pool. To get there from the center of the village, you had to take a little train. One afternoon, after working all morning, I was starving and eager to eat. I grabbed a plate, piled it high with chicken, and was just about to take a bite when Michele, sitting next to me, suddenly grabbed my hand and pushed my fork down. I looked at him, baffled, and asked what on earth he was doing. He calmly explained that we had to wait to eat until someone else arrived. Naturally, I asked who we could possibly be waiting for, since, as far as I could see, everyone was already there. Michele then told me about someone who happened to be in the village that day. I need to tread carefully here, so forgive me if I sound a little vague. Let's just say that if Club Med wanted to run villages in southern Italy or Sicily, they first had to consult with certain organizations. One of these organizations was extremely powerful, and this man was its representative for the southern villages. At first, I made light of the matter, but one sharp look from Michele was enough to remind me to take it very seriously. After all, I was the only North American G.O. in Otranto that summer, and I wasn't used to this kind of situation. A little later, Lulu approached me and explained that she had mentioned me to this man and that he wanted to meet me before deciding whether I could remain in the village. Of course, I agreed. I walked up to the head table where he was seated, shook his hand, and noticed that he turned his head slightly to the left, avoiding eye contact. Still, I must have shown the proper respect because I was allowed to stay. After lunch, I asked my girlfriend about him, and she confirmed what I had suspected. She then spent the rest of that afternoon trying to teach me Italian. Since I couldn't speak Italian yet, I was given only small duties. For the time being, my responsibilities were limited to running volleyball and helping with the beach games, as there was no pool at that time. At night, I studied Italian, and during the day, I practiced what I had learned. I focused only on the phrases I needed to perform my tasks. Fortunately, Italian is very similar to French, so it was easy to pick up. Before long, the village opened, and I was thrown straight into the deep end. Lulu instructed me to escort the Italian GMs to their rooms, despite knowing my Italian was shaky at best. It was a sink or swim moment, and to my relief, I managed to stay afloat. I hadn't come all this way to fail, so I leaned on the handful of sentences Maria had drilled into me and delivered them with confidence. To my surprise, it worked, and from then on, arrivals felt effortless. Another of my responsibilities was handling the weekly airport pickups for the handful of English guests flying in from Gatwick, England. I became their unofficial host, even filling in for Lulu by leading her roundtable discussions to make sure their stay was living up to expectations. I'll never forget the first night we opened and did crazy signs in the outdoor amphitheater. At one point, the theater was split, men on one side, women on the other, and both sides were screaming Italian football chants at each other like it was the World Cup final. I can't repeat the chants here, but I still remember them in Italian perfectly, as if they're burned into my brain forever. The noise, the energy, it was absolute chaos. That's when I realized, Greg, you are officially in Europe now. Everything you knew about Club Med is gone. When I naively asked Pippo and Michele if I could run soccer matches every day at 5 p.m., they didn't just laugh. They howled, slapping their knees, tears streaming down their faces. They shook their heads and muttered, Greg, they will eat you alive. And they weren't kidding. These Italians were not just passionate, they were sports crazed. Every match, a battle for honor. I saw it firsthand, even in a casual volleyball tournament. If an Italian team lost, they wouldn't sulk. No, they marched over to my whiteboard, erased the loss, and announced, What loss, Gregorio? We play again, yeah? As if the defeat never happened. Otranto was full of these moments. I dreaded going to maintenance because no matter what you asked for, the answer was always the same. Dopo domani, which means the day after tomorrow. I laughed so hard the first time I heard it. Anywhere else, tomorrow would have sufficed. Not here. In Italy, even getting a wrench required patience and a sense of humor. Between the screaming chants and the over-the-top sports obsession, Otranto felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone else was playing a game I hadn't read the rules for, and I loved every chaotic, unpredictable second of it. This was a summer village, open for only about 4 months each year, so you had to win, no excuses, during the short season. And by win, I mean constantly outperforming the season before. At Club Med, every new season was measured against the last, so pressure was baked in. Lulu, having led the previous season, had her own numbers to beat. And with the team of all-stars on her team, failure wasn't an option. Michele, one of those all-stars, was a one-man powerhouse, earning nicknames like Robocop and Adrenalina. He could party all night and still show up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for aerobics classes the next morning. You might be thinking, big deal, lots of G.O.s can do that. True, but not at his age at the time. Michele had more energy than anyone I'd ever met, even more than our chief Lulu, and certainly more than anyone else on the team. At the start of each week, he'd burst into the restaurant, throw his arms in the air, and bellow, "Viva Otranto!" just as he used to do in Playa Blanca. One afternoon, I was walking near the beach when I noticed a massive crowd forming. Thinking a fight had broken out, I sprinted down, only to find Michele running a darts tournament. A darts tournament. Something so dull in anyone else's hands, but Michele had 50 or 60 GMs or more gathered around, hanging on every throw. He called each participant by name, and after he announced them, the crowd was required to shout, "Way!" It was ridiculous, but it worked. He had transformed a throwaway game into the highlight of the week. His positive energy was unlike anything I'd ever seen, and I studied him like a hawk, trying to absorb every trick. He became such a favorite that GMs would often chant in the restaurant, "Michele per il capo del villaggio," or Michele for chief of village. He always silenced them quickly, not out of false modesty, but because he genuinely didn't want Lulu, our chief, to feel overshadowed. That humility only made people love him more. Since it was my first time in Europe, I managed to make a classic rookie mistake without even realizing it. It happened during the nationality presentation. Lulu had just called up the lone Canadian, me, to give a short welcome speech when the two pranksters from archery, guys who are from Bari, the neighboring town, begged me to say something when I grabbed the microphone. "Just say Forza Bari," they insisted. "Just say Forza Bari." Now, keep in mind, I'd never set foot in Italy before. I had no clue about the sacred world of calcio, or Italian football, or how deep the rivalries ran. To me, it just sounded like, "Go Barry," a nice little shutout to their hometown. Harmless, right? Wrong. The second I said Forza Bari, I might as well have dropped a flare into the middle of the restaurant. To the chief, I just opened Pandora's box. Apparently, Forza Bari wasn't a civic cheer, it was a football battle cry. And since half our guests every week came from Lecce, Bari's sworn enemies on the pitch, I had basically declared war in front of the entire club. Meanwhile, my two new friends, quote unquote, looked at me like I just secured world peace. They were beaming with pride, thrilled that the clueless Canadian had actually said it. As for me, I wasn't brave. I was just an innocent idiot with a microphone who had no idea what kind of international incident he'd nearly started. Before I go any further, I have to talk about those two archery instructors, whose names are Antonio and Fabrizio. These two weren't just sports G.O.s, they were a two-man comedy troupe disguised as archers. When they weren't stationed at the entrance of the restaurant in costume, hustling people into their various archery tournaments, they were running around the village, stirring up trouble, all in the name of entertainment. Honestly, I'm not convinced they ever slept. Picture this. I'm playing volleyball with the GMs. Everything is normal when Antonio and Fabrizio roll up with a wheelbarrow full of bricks and shovels. Without saying a word to me, they start constructing a brick wall across the court, stacking, shoveling, acting like we weren't even there. Total chaos. But their masterpiece to me was always the pink team during Olympic Day. They'd recruit a squad of GMs, squeeze them into skin-tight pink shorts and feather boas, and then unleash them like a traveling sideshow. It started the night before when they'd ride a bike onto the volleyball court during the opening ceremony of the Olympics, the pink team trailing behind like a bizarre parade. The next day, pure mayhem. In the dizzy bat race, while everyone else spun with their heads on the bat, The pink team sat on the bat and spun around like lunatics. For the egg toss, they stuffed the eggs down their pants instead of throwing them. Every event was another excuse to blow up the rules and make everyone howl with laughter. No one asked them to do this. I repeat, no one asked them to do this. No one could have asked them to do this. It was just Antonio and Fabrizio being Antonio and Fabrizio. To me, they weren't archery instructors. They were super G.O.s, pure chaos wrapped in feather boas. Another G.O. who deserves an honorable mention was, believe it or not, the butcher. The butcher, you ask? What could possibly be so special about him? Well, let me tell you. His name was Tonton. At least that's how I remember it. And every afternoon and evening, he'd chatter away nonstop. The thing was, none of it made sense. Ask him for a chicken leg, and he'd reply with something like, Hada blah blah blah, hada shabada, wacha wacha, oich oich. It was part French, part gibberish, part performance art. When he spotted my girlfriend in line, he had his own special rhyme for her. Et voilà Maria, elle a découvert le Canada. It doesn't rhyme in English, but in French it worked. The point was, he knew she and I were together and that I was from Montreal, and he turned it into kind of a running gag. He had dozens of these little riffs, variations on nonsense, half poems, half mock songs, and somehow I can still remember some of them. For a Club Med butcher, Tonton was truly one in a million. My Sunday morning runs to Brindisi Airport to collect the English GMs had become routine, but there was one I will never forget. It was the last day of August, and I was walking the white dust-covered road toward reception to catch the bus. Along the way, I saw Daisy, the only English G.O. we had that summer. Normally so cheerful, she was standing there in tears. I went straight to her. Daisy, what's wrong? Why are you crying? She looked at me quietly and said, Princess Diana is dead. That's not funny, I said, almost reflexively. I'm not joking, she whispered through her tears. The words hit hard. I had always admired Diana, and all I could think about were her two boys. To make it harder, the English GMs I was about to pick up still didn't know. Diana had died just after midnight in Paris, while the English were already on a plane bound for Italy. On the bus, I debated whether to say something during my welcome speech. In the end, I chose not to. They were here for a holiday, and I couldn't bring myself to start it with such heartbreaking news. They would learn soon enough. Another unforgettable moment from the summer of 1997 in southern Italy unfolded against the backdrop of a mass exodus from Albania, as thousands fled civil unrest and attempted the perilous crossing of the Adriatic in dangerously overcrowded boats. I bring this up because it unexpectedly collided with one of our shows. Like Playa Blanca, we had a massive fire and water spectacle. But unlike Playa's main pool, Otranto only had a tiny beach, which we used for the water portion. One night, near the finale, the sailing and Landsports team paddled their kayaks toward shore when, out of nowhere, two helicopters appeared, roaring overhead with flashing lights. The GM's jaws dropped. They thought it was part of the show and whispered about how we'd magically financed it. For a few tense minutes, the helicopters hovered as we carried on. When the kayaks reached the beach, the maintenance team sent fireworks blasting into the sky. In an instant, the helicopter shot away, no doubt wanting to avoid being turned into fireworks themselves. It wasn't until the next day we learned the truth. Authorities had been tracking an Albanian boat that landed in the cove next door using radar and infrared. The whole village buzzed with the story for days, half awe at the chaos, half relief that nobody got caught in the middle. I have to give a quick shout out to Crazy Signs that season, believe it or not, and Michele. Michele and I treated it like a sprinting marathon. We'd psych ourselves up every night as if we were going into battle. I quickly adopted Michele's trick of always carrying a whistle with me to drive up the tempo. The way we ran it, if you still had a voice after Crazy Signs in Otranto, you hadn't done your job. Like in Playa, Lulu was always watching the G.O.s on stage during dances, and if you weren't giving 300%, you probably shouldn't have been up there at all. I can honestly say I never worked so hard in my life as I did that season, just performing Crazy Signs in Otranto. That season, we had a repeat guest from Playa Blanca pay us a visit. True to his word, Stan Bruckheim, who had been part of the Playa crew with Carnage, came through. Michele, Stan, and I played trios volleyball until the sun dipped below the horizon. Before leaving, Stan generously left his beach volleyball behind for us to use. If you haven't listened yet, I highly recommend checking out Stan Bruckheim's episode that aired in August 2022. It's well worth your time. As the season wound down and we hit our final week, put on her trademark end of season Oscar ceremony, just like she had done at Playa Blanca. The G.O.s all voted on the usual categories: best dancers, best looking guy, best looking girl, and a few other tongue in cheek awards. Somehow I ended up being voted best looking male G.O. To this day, I'm convinced it wasn't because I was actually good looking, but simply because I stood out from the rest of the guys. During my acceptance speech, I made sure to thank Vladimir, the chief of circus at Playa Blanca, for not being there. Otherwise, I would not have stood a chance. Luckily, the Playa crew laughed at that joke, which made me feel like maybe I'd earned the award after all, at least for comic relief. I know I've said this before, but there is something truly special about opening and closing a village. Arriving when no one is there has its own magic, and being among the last to leave carries a unique, bittersweet feeling. It's exciting, but also a little sad, knowing the friends you've made will soon be gone. I vividly remember a first season G.O. from a small town in France who cried openly as departures began. He had grown very attached to many of us and wasn't used to forming a new family, only to have it leave so quickly. During one farewell, he exclaimed, "Je ne supporte plus les départs." I can no longer bear departures, joking that it would be the last time he showed up for a G.O. leaving. My girlfriend and I wanted to do another season together. Lulu was headed to Turks and Caicos, but as a couple, we felt a family-style village would be better. She agreed, and we asked Lulu for help in placing us. That season, I worked harder than ever, going above and beyond in every way. I think that's when I finally earned Lulu's respect. The day finally came for my girlfriend and me to leave Otranto. Lulu and a few other G.O.s were there to see us off. My girlfriend planned to return to her place while we waited for the phone to ring with our next assignment and to take in a few sights along the way. I got to see Rome and Venice, two cities I'd always dreamed of visiting, and they were every bit as magnificent as I imagined. By October 97, I left Italy and went home, waiting for that call about my next adventure, and my girlfriend did the same. And so this chapter comes to a close. But yes, there will be a fifth chapter when I return to Columbus Isle for a second time. And I'm happy to point out, if you didn't already know, that the Michele I've been talking about since Playa Blanca is none other than Michele Staiano. He went on to become a great chief of village and, as of this recording in October 2025, is still serving in that role. Bravo, Adrenalina. Tu me manques beaucoup. Miss you, Michele. Well, that's it, folks. That ends that chapter. So please stay tuned for the next one, which will be my second return to Columbus Isle during the 97-98 winter season, but I wound up staying a whole year for reasons I will explain. I hope you liked it, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.